Good everyone, my name is Navneet Anand from aajKal local and global. Recently, there was an announcement by Australian government that Australians stranded back in India would not be allowed to come. If they come directly from India, they would be either jailed for 5 years or a fine of $66,000. On that discussion, we thought, why not we invite a federal minister from Greenway, Michelle Rowland, here in studio at aajKal. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
You've been very, very critical of the government on this notice that came out for the fine as well as the jail. Any particular reason of supporting Indians or rather Australians stuck in India?
You're absolutely right that this is about Australian citizens who have found themselves in the most unfortunate situation. There's about 9,000 Australian citizens who are in India at this time. Around 650 of them are classified as vulnerable. So this affects them, but it also affects their families and their loved ones back here in Australia. I am critical of the substance of the announcement and the way in which it was done. It was basically announced in the middle of the night, and the inconsistency is something that I simply cannot fathom. Even at the height of COVID, when we had flights stopped coming from other parts of the world, we didn't have this kind of an announcement that threatened criminal sanctions, including potential jail terms, against a specific class of Australian citizen. That is what concerns me, and this has been raised with me by very many constituents, including, may I say, constituents who are not of subcontinent background. They think that this sets a very dangerous precedent, and we know, unfortunately, that in the subcontinent the situation is dire. There are reports now that countries surrounding India will soon be potentially in a similar circumstance. So are the same rules going to be applied in that case as well? And I think the last thing to say is the first duty of government is to protect its citizens. The first duty of the Australian government is to protect Australians. That's if they are here in Australia or if they are abroad. And that is not being done in this instance when it comes to protecting Australian citizens who find themselves in India at this time.
You know, we had the similar situations back sometime last year in US and UK. The flights were coming in, but there was no ban or sanctions on the Australian citizens coming from those countries versus out of India at the moment. Some of the people call it racist, and on the other side, some of them, it's not racist. What's your view on that?
I can appreciate that there are a number of people, and they've expressed this sentiment to me. They are personally affected by it, and they do think that it's racist. For me, I think that this is incompetent. I cannot fathom why the Australian government has not taken heed of a substantial report it has had for some time, saying you need to be prepared for a potential surge in COVID cases coming from overseas. Our quarantine, in the words of the Prime Minister, is world class. If it's world class, why have these sanctions been announced? So it is the double standard that I think is really getting on people's nerves here. And the way in which it was announced with no consultation, and even the consultation, the limited it was, that was done, people who were involved in that said they were blindsided by this announcement of sanctions. So it is not only incompetent in terms of our quarantine systems not being up to scratch, but it doesn't explain why the Prime Minister is now crab walking away from this announcement and trying to say, well, we're not actually going to implement these sanctions. Why announce them in the first place?
I know you being from the opposition, yes, I can understand you attacking the current government, but if your government would have been in power, how would you have handled the situation?
Well, two things, Navneet. Firstly, I think it is well appreciated that when there have been outbreaks in particular countries, commercial flights have been stopped. That is understood. But at the same time, we have had Australians in difficult situations overseas before, and governments of all persuasions have gone out of their way to assist, to repatriate, to help people get home, to do whatever is necessary to keep these Australians safe. And that's not being done in this instance. And we would not have reached this instance, Navneet, where we don't have a quarantine system that's capable of coping with this surge. Even in the words of the Prime Minister, he is saying that it's 99.9% effective. Then on the other hand, they're saying we only want 2% of people at any given time in quarantine to actually be COVID positive. They haven't acted on the recommendations that were given to them some time ago, and we would have done that.
Do you think we have sufficient quarantine facilities here in Australia, or we need more to get most of the Australians back home and then treat them here?
Well, the Halton report itself, so this is not me, this is from a report to government, said that we need to have established quarantine facilities. There's one called Howard Springs that's come online. But the reality is the government sat on this for so long. And it is a responsibility of the Commonwealth Government to take charge of quarantine. Quarantine is actually one of the items in the Constitution. Now, this government has chosen to outsource quarantine to the states. They've been critical of the states. But the reality is it is their responsibility, and they have abrogated that responsibility. And now what we see is the impact of not taking charge. That has been manifested, I think, in what we are seeing in this announcement about Australian citizens in India.
I received a video from Prime Minister yesterday as well, which I was going through, where he's trying to clarify the whole situation, why this announcement was made. This law has always been there, the biosecurity law already there. You came up with a tweet around that time. Do you think the damage control is being done by the government at the moment, or what they did was right?
Well, it is right, and certainly, as I said, not novel, to ensure that when we have those sorts of cases from particular countries, that we do everything we can to keep Australians here safe. And the stopping of flights, that is understood. But if this Prime Minister thinks he can go on some media spin and marketing campaign to undo what he has done, I think a lot of that damage has already been done. And I think that there is great distrust now around what were the motivations behind this. They're clearly seeking to go into marketing mode to mop up this mess that they've created. It is shambolic. And it is the case that this government is both incompetent, but also hasn't properly thought about the steps that needed to be taken in this announcement. I mean, again, if there was no intention of using these powers and enforcing these sanctions, why was it necessary in this particular instance to spell it out? And they still haven't answered that. Now, I think they have clearly been surprised by the amount of backlash that they have received on this issue. They're trying to mop it up, but the reality is people can see it for what it is.
You know, I was going through a tweet from Michael Slater, who's stuck in India as well. He was very, very angry of the fact that he got the permission from government to go, but he's unable to come back. If he comes back, he has to pay the fine. But yes, the government has clarified that there will be no fines and no jails for the people whenever they're allowed to come back. Moving on to other topic. There are some problems with the NBN technicians and subcontractors that are experiencing at the moment. Why are we hearing about it now?
I think part of this has arisen largely because of COVID. And there were some new contracting provisions that were put in place that affect a lot of subcontractors who are actually from this area. And that new form of contracting set up multiple layers of who you were dealing with. It set up this layer of, it's called prime contractors, and a lot of the subcontractors who actually do the work fall under them. And some of those terms and conditions are now coming out as being, quite arduous. The ways in which work is being allocated is now quite complicated. It's being done through a new technology, an app system, and a lot of these workers are now finding that their terms and conditions have been compromised. The way in which they perform work doesn't adequately recognise their skill set and also the time it takes to perform it. And all this has now come to a head where a number of contractors are now going on rolling protests, at least around Sydney. These people are very well informed, they understand their rights, and they are very skilled as well. So they deserve to be paid properly.
So are you surprised with the size and frequency of the protests that's happening at the moment?
I have been surprised because whilst I understood that these were very valid concerns that needed to be investigated, the scale is something that I hadn't fully appreciated. This is impacting on a lot of people, as I said. A lot of them will be your viewers, and it urgently needs to be rectified.
What do you think could be the solution to it and how this needs to be addressed? I'm talking about the NBN issue.
Well, I think NBN Co needs to validate these concerns and needs to appreciate that they are serious. They're not isolated cases, and in fact there's quite a systemic problem going on at a variety of levels. They need to sit down with these workers, including their representatives from the Communications Union, and understand that they need to examine these contracts. They need to appreciate the terms and conditions. They need to understand the pressures that a lot of these contractors are being put under. Let's remember too, Navneet, we made a lot of working from home, studying from home during the pandemic and how important it was to have reliable broadband. It was thanks to these frontline workers that this network kept running, and we owe them, I believe, a full inquiry into how this is going on. The Parliament needs to examine this too, I believe. And I can appreciate their frustrations, especially at a time when $77 million in bonuses is being paid out to NBN executives, and these frontline workers are having their pay effectively cut. It's grossly unfair.
I hope this matter is resolved as soon as possible. Going back to the travel ban and restrictions on the flight coming to Australia, what I pray for, every Australian stuck outside the Australian shore, may it be India, US, UK or any other country, are brought back to Australia and they reunite with the rest of their families. On that note, just want to say thank you so much for your time coming to this Voice aajKal studio and having a conversation. आज हमने की Michelle Rowland से बातचीत और मैं आपका नवनीत. Michelle, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Navneet.
One-stop answer to your Australian education and visa matters. Gemco Sydney. Dream big, achieve big. Fiji Times. Be with the times.